Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Ron. I'm the lead pastor of Vitalpoint Church. I just want to start by saying a huge thanks to all of you who made it to VPC Family Day. What an incredible celebration in the blazing hot sun. So those of you who braved it, thank you so much for being there. It was a celebration of God's goodness, and to see all the people with the orange shirts on, serving, epic to watch that happen, but even more so, the awe and the wonder of 47 baptisms. And it's so amazing to see what God is doing across small towns, and we believe that God is blowing a fresh new wind across small towns, and God's just using us. Next year, I can't wait to be able to celebrate with our 5th location of Grand Bend, which is going to be amazing. Speaking of the summer, we're going to dive in today to a brand new series grounded in the New Testament book called Philippians. What we've done is we've taken this letter and we've broken it down, and we're going to unpack it section by section over the course of the summer. Now, you may not be familiar with the Bible, or maybe you finally relented because a neighbor has been inviting you to come to church. What we're going to discover, what you're going to discover in this series, is God's heart for you. We're also going to get a beautiful picture of God's design for the church. So what we did was we called this series Unshakable, Joy That Holds in Every Season. Now, here's what I want you to consider for the course of the summer. This is our opening challenge right from the very beginning. The challenge is this. The letter of Philippians is broken down into 4 sections or 4 chapters. And what I want us to do over the course of summer is every week, I want you to read a chapter a day. So that Monday, chapter 1, Tuesday, chapter 2, and so on. Now, you'll end on Thursday, which means Friday, you can read the entire letter in one sitting. Now, here's the important thing of this. You might be like, seriously, Ron, I'm going to get bored of the letter. Maybe, but here's what I want you to consider. That the Bible is active and alive, which means this. You will never get to the end of the letter and have it totally figured out. So what you're going to do is each time you sit down to read a section, you're going to pray, God, by your Spirit, show me something that I have not seen before. It might be a word, it might be a phrase, it might be a verse. And then what I want you to do is just underline it, and highlight that and remind yourself so that each time you're reading it over the course of summer, it'll have deeper meaning. I'm praying that those of you who jump into this and do this are going to experience some great things. Now, what is even better, I know you're like, can this get any better? It will. What we're doing for you over the course of summer is producing what is called going further material. And so what we do is we take the Sunday messages and we unpack it in a short devotional for 5 days following that message. And so on top of your reading, right, we're going to give you study material and devotional material that you can do as individuals, you can do with family, maybe with some friends. You get together in the coffee shop and you can go further. I'm excited about what God's going to do with this letter because I am convinced that many of us are going to understand what does it mean to fully follow Jesus? What does it mean to mature in our faith? What does it mean to be the church from this incredible letter? Now, let's dive in and start talking about this. It's going to be joy, this unshakable, this joy that holds in every season. It's going to be a common theme that we see. So let me start by asking you this. What is the difference between happiness and joy? Some of us would be able to very quickly say, well, happiness is based on our circumstances, and joy is a quality that we develop that resides deep within us no matter what the circumstances, and that is true. But what I want to present to you today is this thing that maybe will disrupt that thinking a little bit, because the Bible reveals that happiness is something that we're created to experience. God desires for us to be happy. Matter of fact, there's a section in Matthew chapter 5 called the Beatitudes where Jesus is teaching, and he uses this word blessed at the beginning of each of these statements that he makes in the Beatitudes. Now, it's in the Greek, it has different forms of it, but one of the forms that you might be surprised is the form of happiness or deep contentment. So it carries this idea of being grounded in God's kingdom and in God's way. So that means that the groundedness of happiness begins to extend into an unshakable foundation of joy that we have no matter the circumstances. Because we want to be careful that we don't base our happiness or joy just on our own determination, our circumstances, but it is actually something that grows out of being grounded in God's kingdom in a dynamic relationship with Jesus. And the combination of these two things begins to move us towards understanding this unshakable joy no matter the circumstances that we face in our lives. Now, let's be clear. Unshakable joy is not going through hard times without sorrow, sadness, or grief, okay? Let's just get clear on this. Jesus himself, on the night that he was betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweat drops of blood in his grief, knowing what he was about to do. Matter of fact, one of the times his friend Lazarus dies, and he goes and stands in front of the tomb, and he weeps. See, unshakable joy is not the absence of sorrow, grief, or sadness, and for sure, it's not a creepy smile that you have when you go through difficult things. It is more a deeper contentment that is formed in us, which is actually called the fruit of the Spirit. Paul writes about this in another letter where he says there's a dynamic of the fruit of the Spirit. He starts with love, and the second one is joy. So a life marked by joy is a supernatural transformation of the Spirit of God in us as followers of Jesus, which means it's the formation of the character of Christ in us because he demonstrated what joy looks like. If you want to know if you're maturing in your faith, the evidence of that maturity will be a depth of joy in your life. Now, the letter that this guy named the Apostle Paul wrote to the church at Philippi speaks to the reality of this unshakable joy in a beautiful way, in this powerful way. And I want to give you the background of the letter as we enter into this series, because the background of the letter is going to actually help us understand the depth of why he can teach on this thing called joy. So the letter is written by this guy named the Apostle Paul. I mentioned this. Some of you are fully aware of this and some of you are not. But the Apostle Paul was previously known as Saul. He was a religious leader. He was a Pharisee, and he actually excelled in this beyond anybody else. And he felt it was his God-given assignment to actually protect the ways of God. And so when this new Jesus movement emerges, called the church, he felt it was his responsibility to protect the way of God's faith and the design that he understood it. One day on his way to persecute Christians, to capture them and take them to jail, Jesus encounters him and knocks him off his donkey onto the ground, and he encounters Jesus. And in that moment, he enters into the process of renewing who he would become. He would eventually get this new name, Paul, and he would become a prominent church planter and leader who would write letters for God's church to give direction and correction to the early church. And the letter that Paul writes to the church of Philippi, you ready for this? Is written when he is under house arrest in Rome. So when he speaks about joy or rejoicing, actually rejoicing in forms that is used about 12 times in the letter, we understand that it's not coming from theory or wishful thinking. It's actually coming from a place of understanding deep within himself that he understands what it means to be in a place of joy. Because he's writing to the church at Philippi. This church started actually on one of Paul's missionary journeys. There's 3 missionary journeys. It was the second one that this group started from. It's found in Acts chapter 16. There's this businesswoman named Lydia. There's a demonized slave girl and a jailer's family that make up this place, this church. But here's the thing. He's writing from prison to a church in Philippi, which is known as Little Rome. And the reason why it was known for that is because many retired army people would land in this town, which means that the culture in which this church was in was not receptive to the church. The church was placed in a culture that gave loyalty to Caesar. And now this group of followers of Jesus are coming to the forefront. They're saying, no, our loyalty is to Jesus. We're declaring that Jesus is Lord, not Caesar. So we understand that they're postured in an incredibly difficult time. Matter of fact, 10 to 12 years prior to this, in Acts 16, Paul and Silas are jailed for proclaiming the good news. And so this means that their loyalty to King Jesus has marginalized them. Matter of fact, in chapter 3, verse 20, he speaks to them about the reality of their citizenship in heaven. So what Paul is doing here, with joy in his heart and affection for the church, he's building them up to understand that they can have an unshakable joy no matter the circumstances that they find themselves in. And there's 2 things that emerge in our first conversation of us developing an unshakable joy. I want to read the verses for you. They're found in Philippians chapter 1. They've already been read for us as the whole section. I just want to pluck out a few verses here for us to start. It says this: I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy. Imagine he's in prison and he's saying under house arrest with joy. Because of your partnership in the gospel, I've highlighted that for us, from the first day until now. And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Two things emerge from this letter for us. The first one is the partnership of the gospel, and the second one is the confidence of God's faithfulness to complete what he has started. The two go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So let's break it down. Partnership of the gospel. What does this actually mean, and why is it so significant to this idea of unshakable joy? Scott McKnight, in his as a New Testament scholar, gives some great insight in this because he helps them understand that the partnership in the gospel is not just simply a casual association. It's actually a deeply rooted relationship that is mission-driven. It's a shared life and this idea of what happens to you happens to me. We're in this together. So what Paul is doing is he's drawing them to a bigger picture of what is happening in his life, what is happening in their communal life. There is a unity, there's a commonality in the deepness of the relationship formed around a mission, which is the gospel. And when you ever see the word gospel, it is actually referring to the good news, which is referring to Jesus. So our first learning of unshakable joy is this: that we need to understand that as Jesus people, we can't obsess over our circumstances. We must obsess over a bigger picture of what we're called to. When we obsess over culture and circumstances, it diminishes our joy. Here's why. What we fix our gaze on shapes us. We become a reflection of what we obsess over. This is why our theme for 2025 is what? Behold. It's a life that is captured by the awe and the wonder of God. Our baptism Sunday on June 22nd, just a few days ago, was not a gathering of a show. It was a behold. Behold this moment of what God is doing. Paul is saying, we're in this together. Remember what you're called to. It is the partnership of the gospel. It is the good news of Jesus. He's saying, you are influencers for the kingdom of God. Now, I want you to hear me on this because some of us are squirming. I understand how easy it is to be distracted by the uncertainty of the political landscape in Canada. I understand the deep concern of the woke agenda that's redefining the narrative around human sexuality that does not line up with God's best design for human sexuality. I understand the confusion around celebrating Pride Month when the Bible defines pride as a sin, and the very reason why Satan was cast out of God's presence was because of pride. I understand how easy it is to get angry. Trust me, there's times I want to post things, and then God nudges me through my wife and says, don't post those things. I get all that. But here's the problem. Fixating on those things, talking about them obsessively, always bringing them up in your connect group every single week will not create a joy-filled life. Paul says, I get it. You are in a culture, in a time that is difficult. You're in Philippi, little Rome. I understand how difficult it is, but don't lose sight of the main thing. Think about the partnership of the gospel. Think about the depth of the relationship geared around the mission that we are called to. When I look across the landscape of Vitalpoint Church, I think about what is happening in the partnership of the gospel. The message of the good news that we get to hold out for people. Listen, we're in such an amazing time to be the church. I keep pounding this drum, and I love it because we are in an unbelievable time as a church. VPC sites in small towns, working in partnerships. I loved hearing one baptism of a guy in Forest whose friends in another town that go to one of our other sites had told him about Vitalpoint Church. It's the partnership. It is the good news where we focus on that and the joy that begins to rise up out of a bigger purpose, and everything flows out of that partnership. I was reminded of this even more so at the family day, VPC Family Day. I had this incredible moment that was well beyond the stage and the baptisms and all hundreds and hundreds of people. It was one simple conversation I had. It was a girl in her 20s that wanted to bring her fiance into the auditorium in Poplar Hill to show him the seat that she gave her life to Jesus in. 2 years ago, she'd been brought by someone in our Poplar Hill site, and they came in, their family, their cousins, and they sat in the back, and in the middle of a talk, I had stopped and said that God's speaking to someone, and there's tension in your life, there's confusion in your life. And I paused and said, maybe you just want to give that to Jesus. And she said to me on Sunday that tears were flowing, and she gave her life to Christ, and now she's part of a church in her community where she lives. Partnership of the gospel. It is a depth of relationship built around a mission to be witnesses for Jesus, giving space for others. I love how Paul focuses them on the deeply rooted partnership. See, when we start with an understanding of the reality of this church in Philippi with this businesswoman and this demonized slave girl and the jailer's family, he's saying, what a picture of the church. Now go in the partnership of the gospel. See, we can have an unshakable joy when we understand that we need to be focused on in our lives, what we are driven by. Matter of fact, I'll even stop right now and say, listen, if you've not surrendered your life to Jesus, be like this girl that talked to me on Sunday that said, I gave my life to Christ. And it's just that simple surrendered prayer saying, Jesus, I give my life to you. The second thing that emerges out of this. Oh, by the way, if you did that, make sure you talk to your site pastor, because we want to journey with you to help you grow in your faith. The second thing that Paul speaks about comes from verse 6. It says, I am sure of this, that he who began a work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Second, confidence in God's faithfulness to complete what he started. See, there's something that we need to do first and foremost before we look at the personal application of this verse, is that we must understand that Paul is writing to the community of the church, the people, the collection of the people. And we discover this in the word you. See, in our self-obsessed Western culture, we read this verse and we go, oh, he's talking about me as an individual. Nope, he's not. He's actually, first and foremost, talking to the you in the plural form of the word, which means he's talking to the collection of the people. Listen, I know some of you who've been around church for a long time have put this in verses to give to people that are going through difficult times. I'm not bashing it. I'm just saying cautiously, before we apply it personally, we must understand it collectively. Matter of fact, Paul is so secure in this, writing under house arrest in Rome, he says that, starts that verse by saying, I am sure of this. This is, ready, a leadership and pastoral confidence that he is convinced without wavering, with an understanding and an experience of what God is doing in the church. He has the deep assurance and groundedness in God's faithfulness that what he has started, he will bring to completion. He's actually even drawing them back 10 to 12 years prior to that and helping them understand of what God actually started. It is a powerful truth where joy, an unshakable joy, begins to emerge when you begin to see it beyond just yourself. You see it in the collectiveness of community of what he's talking about. Even if it's hard, and the culture is unresponsive to the ways of Jesus, don't miss the joy of knowing that God started this thing and he will bring it to completion. Now, some of you are like, you want me to do the personal? I'll get there in a minute. I got to stay in the communal application of this. When I look at VPC and the work that God has been doing over the past 10 years, we're celebrating 11 years this fall. I look back over 10 years and I think about how this thing started. It wasn't even called Vitalpoint at the time. It was two faith communities coming together, two churches coming together. That's a miracle in itself, people, that God did this thing 10 years ago. But when I look back, I begin to see that line that I am sure of this, that what God started, he will bring to completion. That there was this unbelievable moment of what God was beginning to do. But here's what I want to present to you that I hope I'm not offline with or out of line with is this. God is faithful to complete his work. Paul assures us of that in verse 6. But here's the thing. It also takes a community of people to walk in obedience, trust, and a willingness to realign with what God is actually doing. The work that has begun will come to completion from God's faithfulness and the willingness of God's people to be obedient to the faithfulness of the good work that they've been assigned to do. Okay? When we entered into that uncertain season of 2020, I knew it was going to be a test of resiliency and strength of this church. I knew it was going to be a season when we would have to dig in, pray, listen, be obedient to what God is doing. The good work that God was doing was revealed in a season of pressure. Hard seasons often reveal the work of what God is doing, and something new is beginning to emerge. Why? Because God is faithful, which means God being faithful, we can have an unshakable joy that moves us through times when it feels like the world is falling, like the bottom has fallen out of things. Vision Sunday a few weeks ago, we laid out a 10-year plan. What we believe God is doing. Now, we're holding it with an open hand, but today when you leave, I'm super stoked about this. When you leave, we're going to give you a card, and on that card is do not hold back, and you're going to see more things on that some of the things that we talked about and more things, so that you have an understanding of the work that God is doing, that he's bringing about his completion. This is powerful. See, when God reveals the good work, he will provide and he will lead into the new reality of the church. Our kingdom assignment, small church, churches in small towns and new sites, new locations, and network that's local and network that's global. It's the partnership of the good news. That's an unshakable joy that we can have in the partnership. What has hit me is this, is that the Father is fine-tuning his goodness and that he will never leave us or forsake us. Now, some of you are like, that's fine, Ron. That's great for the church. But what about the unshakable joy that I need in my life? Because some of us are going through it. Some of us are just going through the valley. Some of us are tangled up in the weeds of life. So how do we have an unshakable joy when it comes to our personal journey? Here's where I want to land. The joy we can have in God's faithfulness is knowing that the hardship and the pain that we're walking through is actually something that God can use to retune our faith. You can say, well, I don't like the valley. I don't like the weeds. I don't like the circumstances. I get it. I understand it. But the beautiful thing is that we can have the confidence of a bigger picture that God is bringing us through those seasons to mature our faith. So when I go through the valley, when I'm tangled in those weeds, I can posture myself with rejoicing, knowing that God is faithful, which leads me to a maturing in my faith and understanding that there's something bigger going on than just this single moment that I'm going through. And that is the partnership of the good news. Because the beauty of understanding the partnership is that when we go through the valleys or when we are tangled in the weeds and God is in the process of bringing good out of those things, is that those are the seasons when God can shine the best in the partnership of the good news. That we recognize that this unshakable joy is the confidence that there's something greater going on that brings something to the forefront that is beautiful. Matter of fact, Paul, at the end of this section that was read for us and we're looking at today, in verse 9 through 11 says, "And it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent and so be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God." I know how difficult it is at times. You want to resist that season. You want to fight back. You want to swing and punch in the air and get angry. And sometimes you have to do that. God can take it. But know that you can have the confidence that you're moving towards an abounding love and a knowledge and a discernment and a maturity and a pureness and a blamelessness, that this unshakable joy is realizing that what you're going through as an individual fits into the bigger picture of the communal mission-driven partnership, which gives richness and meaning. And that we can have an unshakable joy. And as we grow as a church and as we mature in our expression, that collectively we lean in together in this season, trusting and believing in him. See, the thing is, Jesus didn't die and rise again on the third day to give us a comfy life. He did that to give us a new life. And just like the Apostle Paul, who had to go through a process of fine-tuning and maturing and an ability to know that God was at work, he surrendered himself to that, and he was able to write from prison with an unshakable joy and rejoicing of the formation of Christ in his life. So as we land, as we bring this to a conclusion, what part of your life is distracted right now? Is it the culture? Is it your circumstances? Is it politics? Is it the woke agenda? Is it uncertain circumstances? What are you going through right now that you're so fixated on, and it's diminishing the unshakable joy? Understand the big picture of the partnership. If you're a follower of Jesus, understand the partnership of the good news. Have confidence that the faithfulness of God, he's not going to abandon you. He's not going to leave you. He's going to walk with you. Maybe this is a moment for each and every one of us to take a deep breath, to step back as we begin the summer months, that we look at our lives and maybe see some areas where we're out of alignment, where we've become distracted, and bring ourselves back to the place of trusting in the faithfulness and the goodness of God, and to realize that we're called to something greater. And maybe, just maybe, we begin this summer series with a posture of surrender, giving it all to Jesus.